Hello everyone, today we are doing the second part of the Chrome DevTools. Okay, this is a second stream in a series, and essentially we focused mostly on the elements panel in here. This elements panel is obviously very, very powerful when you're developing in Webflow, because you are able to check all the HTML, all the CSS. You can tweak the page, you can do anything you want. So if you've missed that stream, go ahead and check it out. Today, we are just continuing with this, and I want to focus on other panels. The console panel, the sources panel, the network panel, the application panel. All these panels are very powerful, okay? We can use them when building web apps, we can use them when building sites, especially to do debugging, understand when something fails, also help you just figure out better solutions, figure out performance problems, figure out where things are stored, how to store things, etc. Today I want to focus on the console. Okay, let's start with that. So probably everyone knows it already, especially when you're building sites. The console is where the JavaScript code can be run, and it is where errors, so the console logs, console errors, console warnings, everything like that shows up here in the console. So you've probably dealt with a bunch of errors already. When something goes wrong on your side, it always, or should always appear in the console. Okay? So first of all, console, very basic. Let's just go over the UI here, which is very simple. Let me zoom in a bit more. So essentially here, we don't have many controls, but are just things like filtering. Okay, we can filter out everything that it's being console logged. We can also just clean anything. So if I type something in here, blah, 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 and I want to start fresh again, we have this button to just clean up everything. Okay. This drop-down in here essentially allows me to select if I want to console log things from the top, which would be the site. In this case, I'm here in developer.chrome.com. If I want to console log everything that's happening on the site, but also I can drill down a bit more. You can see how I have a bunch of extensions. And essentially an extension is also some JavaScript code that is running on the browser, and probably also in all of the sites that you are loading. So imagine that you are building an extension, or somehow you want to see exactly what a specific extension is logging. You can always filter out by just selecting one of these, okay? But for now, this is very specific. We're just going to focus on the browser itself. Cool. I'm going to dive into this later, but essentially this is a cool feature where we can define an expression, and Chrome will be running that expression in a loop. So essentially it would be kind of like if you did a setter interval with JavaScript, you can, let me just say like this, okay? If we do this, now essentially Chrome will create a loop and keep logging this out. And this is usually used in case that, I don't know, like there's some value and you want to inspect how the value is changing. You could always do a setter interval, but you know, I don't know, convenience probably. You can filter out. So if you have many things going on, let's see if when refreshing this, yeah. So imagine that you have a few things going on. Maybe you want to filter out. That's good. You can filter out basically by anything. You can filter out by the URL. If it's an error, you can check anything in the stack of the error. So imagine that I say anonymous. You can essentially just filter out by whatever you want, okay? Which is convenient. Then in here, it is going to, we can check, filter out more stuff. You know, in this case, I'm just going to show everything. Here in issues, you can see things that are potential issues on your site. This is actually very powerful because, for example, in here, I now can see that a form field element should have an ID or a name attribute. So in here, the Chrome team has missed adding an ID to an element, and here the console is bringing it up. So maybe in your sites, if you're missing things like adding a proper ID, or maybe there's some accessibility issues, or there is some kind of, you know, in here, page layout might be unexpected due to Quicks mode. You know, if there's something that Chrome thinks it could be a potential issue, it's going to show it to you here in the issues, okay? And in here. Okay, and lastly, I'm not going to dive into this, but essentially you can, again, toggle on and off some things that you want to display in the console or not. Okay, so this is the quick rundown, a quick overview of the console. Now let's start doing things, right? So the first thing that you want to do probably is console logging stuff, especially when you're building applications. The console, it's one of your most precious tools. There's going to be a lot of people who tells you like, hey, you also can use a debugger in the sources panel. We're going to dive into this later in the stream. And I get it. It's cool. You know, the debugger provides you a lot of info, but many times you just need to know exactly what's going on, right? Like, is this function being executed, or is this whatever happening when I'm thinking it happens, blah, blah, blah. So you probably want to just add a bunch of console logs in your code when you need to understand things, right? So let's, first of all, obviously you can do console log by just writing console log like this. And inside this console log, you can put anything. So usually maybe you want to add some messaging here. If you do this and you put it in some code, let's say, for example, I have this citing here. So let's imagine that, let's just run some code. I know that it's pretty ugly to do it in here, but imagine that we do something like let test equals the math at random, like this. And we want to console log the test. Okay. So in this case, I want to just run this, and whenever the test variable is created with a random value, I want to just know what that value was, right? Maybe you're debugging, maybe you're doing something. I can now see the value thanks to using the console log. Okay. Console, it's going to be your companion. It can help you a lot when debugging things. Let me open the project that we created like 2 months ago when creating a job board. So imagine that I want to know exactly the jobs, right? Maybe you want to know exactly what data is coming, or you want to do something, whatever. So in this case, you could totally do something like an event, and when a request finishes, get jobs, you can run a function. Inside this function, maybe you want to, do console log the get jobs, like this, right? So now that we are doing this and we go to the site, thanks to this console log, we will be able to see exactly what was loaded. Yay. Okay. So we can see everything. Console log. Very good. Now we can leverage a bit more the console, right? Because doing things like this, it's cool, but we can do better many times. Okay. There are many ways that you might want to present the data in the console. Doing a simple console log like this, it's simple. It goes straight to the point. But there are other ways that we can do consoles. For example, we can do console table like this. Now imagine that I have an object in here that has, hey, test. Oh, another test like this. Okay. We can present this data as a table like this. In this case, hey, this is how this data would be represented. Or we could do, for example, console table with an array. And maybe this array is going to have a couple objects that say name, Alex, age, 30. I just turned 30 a few days ago. I'm old, man. Okay. And I'm going to say their shell. And age, it will be 28. So if we do this, we can see the data presented as a table, which is nice, right? I can see, hey, names and ages. It's very convenient. It's very, very, very convenient. Okay. Now, another one that it's very powerful too, it's using console dir. Okay. Console dir, I first need to explain you a bit of what the values in JavaScript are. Essentially, in JavaScript, everything is an object. Okay. Everything is an object. So if you have a string, this string, it's an object, which is a string object. If you have a number, it's an object too. If you have an object, it's an object. If you have an array like this, it's still an object. Everything is an object that has a prototype. And this prototype implements the the shape of that object. It implements all the methods, all the properties, everything that defines that specific object. Okay, console there will allow you to essentially say everything from that object. So if I say this, hey, with console there, actually, no, hold on. Let me do, hey. You will be able to see everything. And it's especially powerful when you are working with the DOM. Okay, remember that this here in the Elements panel, what you see here, it's the DOM, it's the Document Object Model, which means that it's a representation of your site as JavaScript objects. So this is a JavaScript object, this is a JavaScript object, this is a JavaScript object. Every single node in the DOM is represented by a JavaScript object. Okay, remember that we can do stuff like store as global variable. I don't know if I explained that on the previous stream, but any element that you have here in the Elements panel, you can right click on it and you can say store as global variable. And essentially, if we do this, time1, we just have access to the element. So the element is now stored as a variable, right? But if you try to console log this, you just see the node, right? You don't see anything else. But when you do console.dir like this, now you can see a breakdown of the actual object. Okay, so let me close this. When you do console.dir, in this case, you have full breakdown of all the properties and all the methods of that DOM element, because it is an object. This is very powerful, and it will help you a lot understand what defines a node or any other object that you're interacting with in JavaScript. So for example, we can see all the area properties that all are JavaScript properties. We can see all the attributes, which is a JavaScript property too. We can see all the children, which is it's a property. We can see all the nodes. We can see all the classes. We can see basically everything in here. And also we can see all the methods. So if we go to the prototype in here, we can see that it has all the event methods. It has a link method. It has a background color method. Everything that you can do with that element, that you can interact with that element, it's essentially broken down here in console.dir. So I recommend that you use it, and it will help you understand what JavaScript holds. So what an object holds when you inspect it in JavaScript. Okay, a couple more things that I wanted to show. And I'm going to, because I forgot to mention it before, but many of the tricks that I'm sharing, you can find them in the official documentation from DevTools. So in case that I missed something, or in case that you want to go deeper into all the tips and tricks, you can always check this documentation. It will help you even better. Okay, so I want to, formatting. This is cool. So imagine that you're logging a lot of stuff, right? And it gets to a point where it's quite difficult to understand, all the data that is being logged. So there are a few more things that you can do with the console that are very helpful. Actually, you know what? Let's inspect the console. There is console assert, console clear, console context, console count. There are many methods in here that we could be checking. Okay, so for example, imagine that we want to group something. Okay, in this case, I'm going to say streamers. And now in here, I can console log stuff. Hey. And now I console group end. And I need to use the same streamers name in here. What this will allow me is to group the consoles, the console logs or the errors or the warnings, anything that we show in the console, we can group it together, which is very nice also when trying to inspect many things that are going on. Okay, so probably this is mentioned here in formatting console messages. We can also use colors, I think. Well, here we have an example of console warn. So if we're doing, instead of console log, hey, we do console warn, now this will show as a warning, which is cool. Or we can do console error, and this shows as an error, which is also cool. And remember that you can always inspect where things are coming from. Okay, I think that you can also give colors to it. And I think that, so format specifiers. Yeah, no need for this. Yeah, it's fine. You can, I mean, in the console, you can replace stuff, but it's fine. Let me see. Type conversions. No, styling. Yeah, styling. So in here, I think that it's, let me just copy this for a sec. Yeah. Okay, so let's break down what's happening here. So essentially, when you console log, you can pass properties like CSS properties to it. So in this case, we're saying, hey, right? But if you want to style this, you just have to pass the properties. So let's say background, color, red. Whoops, hold on. I need to pass this now. So you need to append this prefix when you're consoling log something, and then you can add as much CSS as you want, which is cool, and which is what Webflow does, for example, when showing this hold up messaging here. They are just formatting and styling the messages in the console. Very cool if you want to show cool messages or just differentiate between different types of messages. Okay, one last recommendation that I have for you. This is a cool trick when you're building stuff, when you're developing. I use it a lot, and it's very simple, but it's also very helpful. And it's, imagine that you want to log a specific variable, right? Imagine that you have a huge function and there are multiple variables going on, and you want to log the values of different variables, right? Something that I used to do a lot was like test, right? Because when we do this, this is essentially going to log the test value. It's equals to test, right? But, it gets very cumbersome, especially because you just want to quickly log something. So instead of just doing console log test like this, which will just console log the value of test, you can do console log object test, right? And now the cool thing of this is that because it's an object, I can see the properties of it, and the properties are test. So now I don't have to be specifying, hey, this value, which the variable it's called this, belongs to that. Instead, you just log it as an object, and you can see all the variable names directly inside the object, which is nice. If you want to see all the features from the console, go ahead and give this a read. It's probably going to show you more things that I just explained. But how about we jump into the sources panel, because this one, it's very nice. It has many things that can help you a lot when building sites. So the first thing that I explained already is you can essentially in this panel see all the sources that are affecting the site. So you can see it's all the HTML, CSS, JavaScript, everything, right? And you can just go ahead and inspect it in here. So I know that this site has some JavaScript, and the JavaScript files that are being loaded are essentially these ones, and you can inspect them. You can go ahead and inspect the JavaScript as much as you want. Obviously, these would be the same as just going to the page source, looking for the JavaScript files, and then opening them. It's kind of the same. But in here, you have a proper editor. And, well, right now we cannot edit this, but let me just jump right into something that I use a lot personally, and it's what's called overrides in here. Okay, let me disable it, and I will show you again what it looks like. Overrides helps you, as the word says, override anything from the site. And this is so helpful when you are iterating something, when you are trying to debug something, especially when it's a site that you don't own. So imagine that, hey, a friend of yours asks, hey, something is wrong here. Can you give it a look? With the overrides, you can modify anything from the site, and it's going to help. So let me just go to here in the Stream Playground. And right now we're doing this, right? We're console logging something. We have some code that's running on this side. Now imagine that this code, it's some external code or whatever, and we don't have direct access to that code, but we want to still debug it or tweak it a bit to see if we can improve something or we can fix a bug, whatever, right? So if we go to the sources panel in here and we go to overrides, I have it enabled, but I'm disabling it. I'm going to enable it again. Okay. Hold on. Let me refresh because I want to show you exactly how overrides work. So I'm going to enable it now in here. Let me clear. Oh yeah, now. Cool. So first of all, I will have to select a folder, okay? And this folder essentially is a folder where all the overrides will be saved. So it's just local for you. In this case, I have a folder because I use it a lot that it's called overrides in here. When I select the folder, I just need to allow this. And now, any override that I store, it will be stored in a folder named the same as the website. Yep. Let me explain what this is. So imagine that now I want to override something. In this case, the easiest thing that you can do is go to the network panel. I know that we haven't talked much about it, but inspect the network requests and then locate whatever you want to override. Imagine that I want to override the HTML, or imagine that I want to override some JavaScript. Okay, you can just right-click on it and say override content. This option will only appear if you have the overrides enabled. Okay, you override content in here, and now this is no longer read-only, but also we can write in here. And this is so convenient because now I can modify anything from the site. And let me beautify everything. Let me jump in here. How about we do H1, like this. Okay, I'm just going to save it. So Control S, you save it, or I think that you can also do right click, save in here. And you can see how now this appears here in the list of all the sites that I have overridden. Okay, because this is being overridden locally. And now if I refresh the page, look what happens. The content is overridden. But the cool thing of that is that it's not overridden manually by me in the DOM, but it actually comes overridden already from the network. So if we inspect again the network requests, see how it has this purple dot in here that just says, hey, this is being overridden locally. And we can inspect this, and it should include the content. If I'm able to find it, it should include the content in here. Cool. You don't even know how much I use this, especially when debugging things like, WIST sites from people who are having issues using WIST, or attributes, or any other open source library integration, people that are having issues, they need some help. I use overrides a lot because I can modify anything from their site to debug. Like, I can do anything, and without telling them, hey, can you update that from the site? Because then maybe we can see if it fixes it or not. You don't need to be asking these kind of things. You just go ahead, override it locally, and you're good to go. You can override anything. So right now I'm overriding HTML, but I can override, for example, this index.js file that it's trying to be loaded in here, but it's failing. Doesn't matter. I'm just going to, okay, so if it doesn't load on the page, then you cannot override it. But maybe you want to override the CSS. Let's override the CSS. Let's say that the body should have a background color of red, because I know that it's so cool. So if we do this now, it should, unless it's being overridden. Body. Oh, it's being overridden. Come on. Let me do something, or let me just do important. like this. Cool. So we can essentially override anything. And the cool thing is that it will persist. So if we reload the page, this will persist because we are saving it locally. Okay. If you want to get rid of it, just delete it from the overrides. That's it. Delete, all good. Nothing happened here. Now we should be back again at seeing the original content. Okay. So moving on, sources. Now, we can use sources for many more things, right? What the hell is all that's going on here on the side? So anytime that you are running some code, you can always inspect at any moment everything that is happening at that given point. Okay, you can see the scope, you can see the call stack, you can see the event listeners, you can see everything. Okay, and the way that you can do it is by pausing the execution. So let me explain what I mean. We'll try to find it in here. Yeah, because we just have this HTML. So imagine that here, I want to know during this execution of this super advanced snippet that I wrote on the page. So there's in here. Imagine that I need to know a bit more. So console logging is not enough. I need to know who called that. I need to know what was the value in memory of not only the specific line of code that I'm inspecting, but also the whole scope that is available at that point. Okay, you can use a breakpoint, and don't be confused. It's not a breakpoint, a CSS breakpoint. It's a breakpoint in your code. So I can right click on this and I can add a breakpoint in here. And the moment that I do this, now when this code runs, look what happens. Okay, I just refresh the page. And now the page just stopped doing everything because I have a specific breakpoint that said, hey, just pause for a second here because I want to inspect what's going on. Okay? And this is, again, very powerful because without moving on, without executing any more JavaScript, you can see what's going on. Because many times, your console logs something, but maybe something else happens afterwards and, things are messed up and it's hard to understand. But in this case, no. And let's see what we can see here. So we can see, okay, this is what was being called. We can see also the scope, which in this case, it's very simple because it just has this test variable. But we could see many other things. So imagine that there are more values. Anything that's happening, you could see that value also here in this scope. You can see the call stack. And in this case, it just called by here. But imagine that, let's do it a bit more complex. Let's do, not console log, sorry. Let's do a function. And this function, like this, right? So this function, and then we decide to do like this. But also, let's pass some value. Let's pass in here, and let's also console log that value. And this value, let's just make another random value, whatever, okay? And let's also pass that in the function. So I'm making this a bit more complex. I'm just creating a function that console logs some random stuff and also console logs a value that we're passing in the function. And then hopefully we'll be able to see everything. Okay, so let's continue 1 second. Let's remove this breakpoint and let me refresh the page because this should be updated. Okay, and let's add another breakpoint now here in this console. Okay, I have a breakpoint at this moment. So when I refresh the page, now see how the local provides me all the values. So I can see the value, I can see the test, I can see the script. So I can see this specific function that was executed. I can see the call stack. And in the call stack, I can see how, first of all, it started from the script. And then the testing function was called in here. And inside the testing function is where we are right now. It's this arrow showing it in here. It can help you a lot to understand everything that's going on. Obviously, if you have more things, more breakpoints, now you have full control of just jumping into the next breakpoint. So you can, add a bunch of stops, and you can just go ahead and inspect everything. Okay. So I can move on, I can move on, I can move on, I can move on, or I can just play, and that's it. So this is very convenient. It's more advanced, but it's very powerful. So imagine that, let me come here. So imagine that I have this error in here, okay? And this specific error, it's happening in here, right? So when we run this function, at some point, the error is happening. If I put a breakpoint in here, like this, now this is going to stop before the error happens. So you can see how the console, it's not showing any error, and I've been paused where I can inspect everything, right? So this gives you a good look of the state of things before moving on and actually throwing the error. Okay, what else am I missing here? I mean, there are many other things that you can inspect. So you can inspect the global scope. Let me just go back here. You can inspect the global scope, which would be essentially the window in this case. So you can see all the values in the window. You can see anything. You can also inspect if there are event listeners. So in this case, we can see what event listeners are added and at which point. You can even remove the event listeners if you want to play around with them. You can add more event listeners yourself. This one is cool, actually. Let me do this. Remove. So imagine that, let me add some element in here. Like this. Let me just add this. And let me close. Okay, so imagine that this specific element, I want to pause to inspect when something happens, right? So I can come to the sources and I can add a breakpoint whenever something happens. So if I add a breakpoint and click in here and I click on the page, this is now going to stop execution of everything because, hey, you've added a breakpoint when clicking. And this is so cool, especially when you're trying to debug other libraries, like maybe, I don't know, let me do slider, whatever, okay? Let's add this slider. And maybe for any reason, you need to understand like what's happening when you click on this button, right? So in this case, you could, for example, go to the sources, add the click breakpoint, and now whenever I click on the arrow, before executing anything, it will show me all the steps that will happen that were fired, that were triggered from that specific click. And I can keep navigating, moving on. So I can see exactly everything that it's happening that was triggered from that specific click. So now obviously it's going to take a lot because many things happen. Webflow does a lot of things with the slider. But essentially you can inspect every single line that it's being run and originated since the click that I just did. So long, okay? I think that, yeah, we can just keep going and going, but I'm going to stop, okay? So thankfully, that can help you also understand how things are being fired from your application, okay? Okay, network requests. Essentially, you can see all the network requests that happen on the site, right? But this is another thing that it's very, very powerful and you really need to understand when developing sites, or even if you're not, building web applications and just doing static sites. It's also very interesting to know. So let's just refresh this and inspect the first thing that happens. The first thing that we can do is in here, we have a full timeline of all the requests that are happening. So I can just filter out by selecting, and I can see every single request that it's happening. So I know that since the moment that the page started loading, the first 200 milliseconds, we had these requests happen, and these ones finished But there was one request that took almost 3 seconds, which is probably this one. Yeah. And we can basically see the breakdown of when a request starts, the time that it takes, and when a request finishes. You can also inspect this by checking the waterfall in here. And the waterfall it's the same representation that you could see up here, and it shows you the moment that the request starts and it finishes. And if you hover over it, you can even see a breakdown of everything. You can see when it started queuing, when it was executed, how long it was stalled, how long it waited for a server response, how long it took to download the content, etc. You can even click on this, and I think that you have a full breakdown explanation of everything, which is very nice. Okay. This waterfall is especially important when you're loading things in your site. For example, if you have a web application, let me go to the job board. I think that it was this one. Yeah, so this is the web app that we built with Wisp a few weeks ago. And in here, we are doing a bunch of requests. So with these requests, we can see exactly everything that's going on. The moment that the HTML starts loading, and then some CSS starts loading, and then some JavaScript starts loading, which is the Wisp script, and then also some other Wisp script in here. And then we can see the moment that the jobs were started loading. Let me see if I can find them. It's in here. So probably you can see how the moment that Wisp is loaded, then the jobs start loading in here. And you can see the time that it took to for this request to happen to load the job items. So it's very important for you to understand all the requests that are happening to see if, you have a big waterfall of things that are depending on each one, and maybe you can improve them by just running them all together. You can see if something is taking too long to load. You can essentially inspect anything. Okay. Right now, it's very hard to filter out things, like to understand things that are going on. So up in here, you have a bunch of filters that you can use. I recommend that you try them. So you can filter by just JavaScript files, or just the document, which would be the HTML, or just some fetch calls. And in here, you can see how we did 2 fetch calls. One is a track call that Wisp does for billing purposes, and then the other fetch call that retrieves the jobs in here. You can also fetch by CSS, fonts, images, other media like videos or iframes, I think, manifests, WebSockets, WASM. WASM is a way of running other languages that it's not JavaScript in the browser, and other things like this fab icon. I don't know why it's here in other. But anyways, okay, so once you filter things and you localize things, you can then inspect each network request, right? And in this case, inspecting a network request is as simple as just either seeing the info that it's shown here in the columns, so you can see what's the domain of the target, so where the request is happening. You can even see the initiator. So essentially here, same as the sources has a console that I told you that you can see the full stack trace, you can see the initiator of each of the requests. So if I click in here, I know that the request was originated from this specific line of code. So this fetch that we have in here. Or if I come here and I check the initiator, I can see that the request happened in this specific line of code. So if you ever need to debug and know exactly how a request is happening, like what's triggering that request, you can always come to the initiator and you can see the direct initiator, or you can see the full scope. So in here, maybe you want to inspect, I don't know, any previous function that was called until the moment that the request was fired. You can see the size of it. So you can see the transfer. You can see the time that it took. You can right click in here and add more things. You can see the method. You can see the status. You can see the protocol. You can see the scheme. So there are many things that I usually don't use, but you can check them out, which is nice. Yeah. You can see if there were any cookies sent through this request. If those cookies were set on the page, it looks like a cookie was set in here. No idea. Okay, you can see if it has overrides. You can sort them. Well, essentially, you can tweak a lot this data. Yep. And lastly, you can inspect that specific network request. So when you click on it, you will see all these different tabs. You can see all the headers. You can see the preview. You can see the response, initiator, timing, and cookies. Oh, see, we can see the cookie that I set up. It's something from Xano, looks like. Yeah, from Xano. Okay, so in the headers, you can see the request data. So the target URL, you can see the method, you can see the response code, and then you can see the response headers. So all the headers that came from the server. You can also see all the request headers. So all the headers that we included when sending out the data. Many of these headers are being included by the browser. So you don't have to be necessarily writing those headers for them to be included in here. Usually the browsers inject them for you. It's probably like accept encoding, the caching, all of this it's injected by the browser. Preview is essentially just a way of inspecting the response. So imagine that you are fetching some data, right? But you want to know exactly what data is coming in the response. You can either console log stuff, you put it in the console and you inspect it, or you just go directly to the network, you click on it, you go to preview, and then you can see all the data that's coming. So in this case, I can see that I am getting an array that contains 3 objects, and each of these objects has an ID, show description, text, title, created at, etc. And this is very powerful. You can also see the raw response. So the raw response would be essentially the same as the preview, but without parsing it. It's just the plain text that it's coming from in the body. You can again see the initiator, which is the same thing as we saw here. You can also see the timing, which is the same thing that you can see if you hover in the waterfall. You can also see the cookies, if there was some cookie set by the server when sending out the response. Okay, this is all something that you really have to master, because it can help you a lot understand all the data that it's coming or all the data that it's being sent outside. Okay, I think that also when the request contains some body, so some payload, let me show you. You can also see the payload. So if there were some query strings or if there is some body as JSON, you can also see it here in the payload, which can help you a lot understand, how you are calling the server at some points. Okay, cool. I would love to have just a specific stream for this, but I think that it's kind of a general overview. One last thing that I want to show you before leaving is that there are a bunch of controls up here. There are mostly for filtering, but also there are a couple cool things. For example, you can throttle. And throttling is essentially a way of faking different internet speeds. So you can decide, hey, I want to test my application if I have slow 3G. Let's do it. Now I am purposely faking the slow 3G. So now we can see how it's going to take quite a long time for everything to load. It will take a while, but eventually it happened. Okay. You can also decide if you want to disable cache or enable cache. When I'm debugging, I always disable the cache, because you can see how the size at some points, I cannot see the size because this size is coming from the cache. And this is because the browsers store data in the cache. So if you reload the page or you're navigating through a site, it's easier for you to, it doesn't take that long. It doesn't consume as much data. But usually when you're debugging, you want to make sure that you're getting the latest version of everything. So when you disable the cache, now you will see how nothing comes from the cache. Everything is downloaded again, right? So for debugging an array, I really recommend it. And if you need to force something to be cleared up, you can always come to the reload button You can right click on it and you can empty cache and hard reload. And whenever you do this, you're essentially just cleaning up all the cache. So if I disable the cache and I reload, you can see how things are being loaded from the cache. But if I empty the cache and hard reload, then it's going to download again everything. So also cool thing to know. What else? I think that you can also tweak different browsers, like you can fake if you are a different browser, because maybe some servers treat you differently. That's also powerful. And what else? I don't know. You can download, like imagine that you will need to share something with somebody, like, hey, I'm getting a weird request. You can download it and then send that file to somebody, and that person can upload it, and he will see the exact breakdown of all the requests in his DevTools in here. That's very nice whenever you need to share something to a teammate or something like that. That's mostly it. I mean, everything here is basically just filtering. Couple cool things that I forgot. Sorry. This request in here, there's also something very cool that you can do, and is that any request that you have here, you can right click on it. And one option that I showed you before already is override the content. That is cool. But also you can do other cool things. You can, for example, open in sources panel, and you can inspect that in the sources panel. You can open in a new tab. And when you do this, essentially you're going to be visiting this resource in a new tab. With maybe sometimes you need to open the file. But something cool is that you can also copy this request as any format that you want. So imagine that you need to do something that's very similar to this. You can do, or maybe, hold on, let me show you the fetch. Maybe you want to reproduce this fetch request in some other code that you're writing. You can come here, you can do copy, and you can copy as fetch, for example. And now it's going to copy the entire fetch request with using JavaScript with the fetch API, exactly how it happened. You can also copy it as a CURL. And in this case, it's going to copy it so you can run it in your terminal in here. You can also copy it as the hard file, for example, is the file that is downloaded. You can copy it as Node.js fetch, but I think that this is pretty outdated because it's essentially the same now. You can copy as mostly anything. It's PowerShell, which I don't know what, I mean, it's a terminal thing, but yeah. But any time that you need to just replicate a request, you can just copy it and run it in your own code. That's cool. Okay, cool. Today we're done. And if you like this, please let me know, because the Chrome DevTools is just something that just keeps on giving. There are so many things going on in the DevTools, and I would need an entire week just to show you all the features. So if you like this, please let us know, share it in social media, just leave comments, likes, and stay tuned for the next streams. So thank you, everyone. Bye.